It's time for Type 40, your Doctor Who podcast from the Spacebook for the Fandom Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hadley, Birmingham's king of the geeks, your designated driver and movie goer this time. Once again, opening up Doctor Who conversation here on our free-speaking, big-thinking show for everyone, whatever decade or century you've been watching, reading or listening along to those ongoing adventures of our hero, Doctor Who. We talk about it all on this show, and we even throw in the odd laugh or two along the way. So come and step into our TARDIS in this 60th anniversary year, no less, here on Type 40. Welcome back. Hope you're seated or ready to take your seat again for the next in our Diamond Review series. Make yourself comfy. I know I intend to. I've forgotten the popcorn though. Maybe she's remembered it because I've got Charlotte. Have you brought the popcorn? Where are you? There she is.
There you go. If you bring me on, I can maybe tell you. Yeah, which one though? That's the choice for popcorn. What's your favourite flavour?
Okay, it's a choice between salted and sweet.
Oh, see, I like sweet.
Yeah, I think I go for the sweet as well. I was categorically against salted until relatively recently, but I have become a convert because your tastes change when you get older. I think I tried salted popcorn 15, 20 years ago, hated it, tried it again recently, thought it was lovely. But given the choice, given the option, I go for sweet. I go for sweet as well.
You don't need to drink as much. That used to always do my head in at the cinema. Like I'd guess if I got salted, I was like, I needed something, and I didn't want to pay for a drink because I was kite as well as my popcorn.
I like it. There's some sort of caramelized popcorn option now as well. All manner.
Oh yes, you can. Those are nice. Like the little bags. Don't get 10 ton of them because you can get very sick off them. But little bags of those is quite nice.
You can now customize popcorn and brew up your own flavor, no doubt, just like Louise is doing in the TARDIS on our desktop this time. The Doctor Who movie TARDIS that changed quite a lot in between films, didn't it? But those black drapes and the white panel door there that Russell T Davies clearly admired so much that he brought it through to the new series, didn't he?
You can see a lot. That's what I love about TARDISes in Doctor Who in general. Like you can see that so many creators of TARDISes get a bit inspired by the one before, and you can see little signs and little things that they've taken and sort of made their own versions of, which I think is just lovely.
Take this bit, that worked, leave that bit, that didn't, completely get rid of that, forget we even did it because it was awful, that kind of thing. Naming no names, pointing in no particular direction at all. Yeah, I love the fact that it looks like here there's almost too many tubes going across the ceiling and things like that. You get the impression it is a laboratory as well as a time-space capsule.
It's like some TARDISes look very comfy, don't they, and very lived in. This looks like more like a working TARDIS.
Yeah. And although I suppose there are lots of things that looked high-tech in the 60s that have stayed part of culture now charlatans sort of have evolved, like the radio alarm clock has evolved into something else, and tease maids evolved into something else. I think some of the tech that we see in Doctor Who's various console rooms was probably in common use in the 50s into the 60s, and they sort of jazzed it up a little bit, like a Bunsen burner and things like that, just to make it that little bit more interesting. But I could stare at pictures of both versions of the movies console rooms forever. I never get fed up with that. It's just so different. Times change, but maybe they don't. So I was thinking about this as well before we came on for this one. How back then in the mid 60s, by the time that this film came out that we're going to talk about this time, the general public had only had Doctor Who, any version of Doctor Who, in their lives for around 3 years, and then all of a sudden there was not just one guy playing it, but two, and how that is kind of similar to where we are now, because effectively now Doctor Who TV show, it's got two leads, isn't it? There's two productions ongoing that we're hearing about simultaneously, and Ncuti Gatwa and David Tennant, the 14th, 15th Doctor, at the same time. But way back then in the mid 60s, that would have been unheard of for actors to share roles, wouldn't it? But there they were, though. We've got Peter Cushing on the big screen and William Hartnell still on the small screen. It must have been quite strange for children in particular, hadn't it?
Yeah, and it must have been so strange to also have somebody like Cushing, who was such a well-known actor at that point, who'd done all the Hammer stuff, who'd done really well-known movies, to suddenly be the Doctor. Because even now, I think we even say now, don't we, when we get the usual who's going to be the Doctor when we get there, we all say, oh, it won't be a big movie person, don't we? We say it won't be type of actor. But we got a genuine movie star, which I just always find just amazing, and is a testament really to what the IP can do, who it can allow to come and play for a bit.
I do look across at other universes now and see, I mean, for example, just in the last 12 months, as of time of recording, we've got 3 actors on the big screen playing Batman. Got Ben Affleck, Robert Pattinson, and Michael Keaton returning to the role after 30 years. And the public we just accept it all, don't we? And yet 2 actors playing Doctor Who back then, it was a big deal.
Yeah, I think any show to go from the TV to the movie sort of universe was rare. It's the impression I've always got, unless I'm wrong there, but I always got the impression like if something was a television program, it stayed in television.
Stayed in its lane, yeah.
Yeah, it sort of stayed in its own lane, yeah. And also the fact that it'd make a bit more sense if this maybe was during Tom's era, when the show was everywhere and it was at a height of its powers. But for William Hartnell's run to have this when it was still quite new and the character was still sort of establishing themselves, I think it's incredibly risky. I don't know what you feel like, but I think it shows a lot of gumption and risk.
I think it's testimony to the huge impact of the character in such a short period of time that William Hartnell had brought to life a genuine TV icon, a purpose-built TV icon. Whereas, I suppose, on British television in particular, I think there have been very, very few up till then. Dixon of Dock Green was probably one, but he started in films as well. And so this was something that genuinely had been conceived for television and was taking flight. So I think that's what makes it so idiosyncratic. Doctor Who absolutely does belong on TV, without a shadow of a doubt. But it took, I suppose, you could say it was greed that people wanted to make these films. But it's a kind of a moment of inspiration, really, to go to, if not the biggest movie star on the planet at the time, certainly Peter Cushing, as you say, somebody who was this really, really noted, really respected actor who everybody knew. He brought his own. He didn't bring his own take on the character as such, but he brought his own star power, I think to it. and he was tremendously successful in that first of the, we call them the Dalek movies, don't we, from the 1960s. And we got together and we talked about them last year on the show. So yeah, we covered Doctor Who and the Daleks from 1965, starred Peter Cushing and Roberta Tovey, and we went and did a deep dive review on that. And we're back again, this time for the sequel. It was re-released last year around the cinemas and onto home media. And so we got together and we had a bit of a chinwag about that second and final installment of the parallel universe of Doctor Who, the adventures of Doctor Full Stop or Doctor Period Who. And we'll get stuck into all of that in a few minutes. But before we do, opening up that whole parallel universe, Charlotte, it sounds absolutely exhausting. So whilst I remember, I'm going to take a moment to remind you that each and every edition of this show, past, present, and future, is just a tap or two away on the device of your choice, only if you know where to look. There's dozens upon dozens of reviews, previews, interviews, geek outs, deep dives, everything else with all our regular panelists and some pretty awesome guests. In fact, we know there's something for every fan over at type40.podbean.com. Go and try it for yourself, see if I'm right or not. I think you'll find I'm right. And before I forget, of course, we'll be making contact with that matrix of all knowledge that we call the Fandom Podcast Network for a word about all the other cult conversations going on across all the other shows over there. Almost there, primed, ready to go. The test tubes are bubbling away and everything's whizzing and whirring. I can practically feel the warmth of a lava lamp against my own cheek. But I did want to mention before we did, our friend Ian MacLachlan. So a little while after this was recorded, our panelist, fellow fan, and much loved and respected friend to so many in the Doctor Who community, Ian MacLachlan passed away. I'd not known Ian personally for that long, but he'd made a big impact on me in that time. And whilst I was in no doubt, Ian would want his review and memories of this movie very much out there. He's that kind of guy. I didn't feel it was appropriate to release this or any of the other unpublished material he worked on with us until now. Ian was his verbose, playful, and authoritative self, as always, Charlotte, and right back there in his happy place, wasn't he?
Yeah, this was my first ever proper stream or meeting of Ian. I knew he was a good friend of you and a few others on the channel, and I can just remember him being so warm. From the moment when you were like, "Oh, this is Charlotte," she's on the live shows, and you just was like, and you just instantly was chatting because we do chat quite a bit before we sort of record these things, and it was lovely. Also, you could see he was interested in the fact that I came at a very different point to this show than he did, but instead of looking down at that, he loved that and he was interested. So it was just lovely to have that shared, very different life sort of meeting over Doctor Who.
All that Ian ever needed to know was that you were another Doctor Who fan. That was enough. That was the key in the door. That was it all opening up. From then on, Ian was interested in people anyway. It was certainly by all accounts that I've heard about his life before I met him. But Doctor Who fans, he would want to know what your favourite stories were when you found the show, all manner of things in between. And he was happy to share all his memories too, to tell you, in exchange for him wanting to know your favourite stories, for example, your favourite characters and your happy place. He was always happy to share his, and that's where we're going now, right back to the earliest days of the Doctor Who phenomena in the mid-60s. So, over to us. The first theatrical film based on the hit BBC TV series Doctor Who and the Daleks, starring Peter Cushing, had been a huge success, exceeding expectations and even playing well overseas. A sequel from the same production team was being talked about right away, with Cushing returning on the one condition that Roberta Tovey would also return as Doctor Who's granddaughter Susan for Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD, with a much larger budget, with masses of location filming and a much larger speaking cast. And it would be in the cinemas just under a year later, from the 5th of August 1966. I'm back to talk about this film again in the Doctor Who series, the short-lived Doctor Who movie series, along with JT, with horror hound Peter, and with our good friend, human search engine, Ian MacLachlan.
And just as quickly as they followed up the Dalek film, we're following up our episode with the second one, 2150 AD. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, we are.
I'm delighted to say joining us this time is Charlotte Shields. You've just watched the film as well, haven't you, Charlotte? So she's going to give us her fresh take on this classic 1966 sci-fi extravaganza that yet again they bring in at under 90 minutes. An incredible feat. So yeah, this is the second of sadly only 2 Doctor Who theatrical movies that were released in the mid-60s. What could have been? What could have been? Now, it's probably best not to focus on what we never got and just be grateful about what we did. And yeah, this second Doctor Who film reunited, okay, half of the cast, but a great deal of the production team. And I think it upscaled. The expression, JT, for this one is upscaling, isn't it?
Oh, it is, absolutely, because this is actually completely different when you compare it to Doctor Who and the Daleks. Invasion Earth 2150 comes across as a little bit more glossy. You mentioned at the top of the show that there's outdoor filming, which they didn't have in the previous film. The budget has been slightly increased. Cushing is obviously back in his mix there. He's relishing this part again. He's delighted to be back there. And then there's sort of little things, the refinements to the Daleks, the refinements to the TARDIS, and that humour tone. And we get introduced, well, not the first time in Doctor Who, to the legend that is Bernard Cribbins.
Yeah, it's a very confident film, I think. Obviously, they knew from the only way to get better at doing anything is to just do it over and over again, isn't it? So, understandably, they'd probably been on somewhat of a learning curve with Doctor Who and the Daleks in 1965. To come out with a second film, though, so quickly, Ian, it's very confident, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. It was great that they did that. As I said in my earlier talk, I only saw it in a double bill because I hadn't seen Doctor Who and the Daleks originally.
Lucky boy.
Predating Star Wars by years.
Yeah, some years later, my father took me to see the 2 films. So I finally got to see them. But
Wonderful.
I remember seeing the poster. We were in London and there was a poster, that striking poster that you showed earlier. And I thought, oh, another Dalek film. That sounds interesting. But
because back then, Ian, there wasn't what we now know as hype, was there? So oftentimes you probably wouldn't be that aware of what you were going to get at the cinema until a few weeks beforehand, when you would see it in a display case actually from the high street as you're walking past the cinema.
Yes, I don't regard the publicity. I mean, I remember seeing clips from the first film on television in a program about films, but I don't remember anything about the second film. So the first time I knew about it was the poster in London that I saw, and
wow.
I was surprised about that.
You see, even the image of the poster, Ian, is totally different to the one for the previous film. It gives you that grander awareness as a child. If you saw that back in the day, you must be thinking, this is a bit more action. This is a bit more dramatic.
Yes, it's interesting. It's not Doctor Who in the front. It's a Roboman.
Roboman.
Yes, so I get the impression when we last spoke, Peter, we mentioned, are these Doctor Who films or are they Dalek films? I think we all kind of realised that they're probably Dalek films, but there's no doubt about it is that by the second movie that the Daleks really are the stars of this film.
Yeah, this is the one. This is the one. They really have cranked it up several notches, much darker in tone. Significant improvement. This is really what we're talking about. Absolutely love this one.
He looks
This
a lot,
really
lot happier,
had-
everybody. This is going to be a
Great.
colourful review. I can feel it in my water. Of course, Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD is also about to be re-released for the very first time on 4K Ultra HD Blu Ray in a combination pack on the, yes, that's out on the 18th of July 2022. And it's available as a collector's edition steelbook and as a big box set with lots of extras. We'll talk about that again a little later on after we've had our roundtable discussion about everything that's great, well, and maybe not so great, that's to be decided, about Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD. I mean, it starts with this incredibly evocative opening, swirling sort of vortex, doesn't it? That immediately, I think, feels like, I think there's a touch of the Wizard of Oz about this. I think that it's slightly less cozy from the get-go, JT. There's a pre-credit sequence. I shouldn't gloss over that. There's a pre-credit sequence that is so well shot, so full of wit and movement and a flavour that really sets you up for this film. It reminds me of Flash Gordon even, and all those kind of movies and the old serials. And we didn't get that with the first film, the pre-credit sequence. Again, it's next level cinematic. And although the budget didn't double or triple, they have got more money to play with, and that's immediate from the get-go, isn't it? That's
you see it immediately on screen, don't you? You really do from that. I mean, there are this movie is slightly ahead of its time, really, because you've got the opening sequence, then you've got a title sequence, which is very, it's very science fiction in a sense. They've learned from there, and it's got that wonderful theme, that very 60s film mixed with that ingredient of electronic music in there, and then it's back. And what it does is it just hits the ground running. It assumes you've seen the first Peter Cushing film. This is Peter Cushing.
Yeah,
Doctor Who. This is Susan. That this is a policeman that's just come in on the action. And then the only new character, of course, is his niece, Louise. Mm-hmm. So, and that's crossed over very quickly as well when he introduced her. This is my niece Louise, and then on to the next one. Wonderful stuff, and bang, straight into the action. And as Peter was saying there as well, the stakes are higher when you go into this because you're just taken deliberately to the year 2150. And you're straight into the story.
Well,
Everything
one thing we didn't mention in the last one we did was the music. And I'm glad that you've mentioned the music. It has a superb soundtrack. And I would say some of my old favorite programs in the 60s, including Lost in Space, Land of the Giants, had fantastic soundtracks. And if you got a film or a series with a great musical soundtrack, that makes all the difference.
Oh, totally.
I think
I totally agree with that. And this makes it, doesn't it? Because it's set in the future, but it's also very 60s at the time. And now you can look at it with a view of the past, thinking, "Oh, this is really comfortable,"
Yes.
Again, it's ambitious, and it sounds like a bigger film than it actually is. And that's what I admire about these films. That's what I admire about everything that Amicus was doing, and a lot of what British cinema had been doing up to that point. I mean, I think we were at the point now in history in the mid-60s, 66 in particular, where the British film industry was sadly on the verge of a kind of collapse, but you would never know it from a film with this amount of sort of swagger, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
But then I think it helped that Kellogg's Sugar Puffs.
Oh,
yes.
Get the cereal money in.
For Dr. Who.
Product placement at its best.
Yeah, absolutely.
This brings me...
it's one of the. It's funny you've mentioned Sugar Puffs there, because it's actually one of those things. You've got the branding for Sugar Puffs as the product placement because they obviously invested in the film throughout the film. And what makes me laugh is that in their 2150 they're still using the 1960s branding, so maybe they were, and of course now in 2022 we can't have Sugar Puffs. They have been renamed to Honey Monsters rice cereal or whatever it is, because you can't use the word sugar because of all this thing. It's a sign of the times. So it's lovely, isn't it?
It's already from a parallel universe. Obviously, Charlotte, we grew up watching these films. They've been shown, they've been screened on television umpteen times across various different channels. Ian went to see it in the cinema, albeit in a double bill with the preceding film, Doctor Who and the Daleks from 1965. But how many times have you seen Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD? And when did you first catch it?
I think I knew of their existence, that there were these movies, and it was sort of that debate: are they canon? Are they not? Like, where do they actually fit? Which I sort of knew about their existence more than actually knowing what the films were, if that made sense.
Yeah.
And before, I'd watched them once because I am going through classic right now. I am sort of doing it bit by bit, so I knew I had to watch them because it just felt right. So this was the second time I'd watched them. And yeah, I really love the opening though, because it's quite sort of, it's not big. You obviously get the opening with Bernard Cribbins' character and the sort of just this sort of policeman who's looking like he wants to go on holiday and he wants to do something a bit more. And then you get like this sort of robbery. And then it's very quick that you do get to the sort of 22 sort of stuff. But I like that opening actually. It's sort of a bit cozy and then it expands out, which I think is the best way to do that sort of thing.
It's actually a lovely way, Charlotte, isn't it, to introduce a new companion? You know, I mean, he's caught up in a jewel heist, and he ends up seeing a police box. He's a policeman. That's how they used to call for help. It just makes perfect sense. And then he gets kidnapped by this madman. Brilliant.
And if you think about it, JT, we talked about Doctor Who and the Daleks, about how that opening scene, albeit after the credits, we pan around a sitting room, a normal British sitting room with a normal, on the surface, family, and no words are spoken. We get that in the pre-credit sequence. You know, Ian's right about the music. There's whistles being blown, and it all feels very Dixon of Dock Green, very Z-Cars maybe. But again, there's no dialogue at all. There's puffing and panting, and that's largely it until we get the credit sequence there. But just in case you haven't seen this film, or you're a bit shaky about what happens in the movie, is a quick recap, a quick synopsis. Police Constable Tom Campbell witnesses a jewel theft and runs into a police call box to get some backup. However, the phone box happens to be Doctor Who's TARDIS, and he is instead whisked away to the year 2150 with Doctor Who, his granddaughter Susan, and niece Louise. There they find a London reduced to ruins after an invasion by the Daleks, patrolled by their zombified human robo-men. Soon, I know, it's terrible, isn't it? I'm on the edge of my seat just reading about it. Soon the time travelers are captured and taken to be used as part of the Dalek slave labor force, mining the very core of the Earth to turn the planet into a giant Dalek spaceship. Whew, talk about the stakes going up. That really is. I mean,
wasn't it interesting, Dan? I mean, a couple of points I would make there. 1966. Dodo went into a police box thinking it was a genuine police box at the same time as it happened in the film. Now, maybe some of you will tell me if I'm right or wrong. I've read somewhere that Peter Cushing was ill at the time of that film being made.
Apparently so.
His heart was reduced considerably to what it would be originally. So it wasn't quite end up the way they expected. It was interesting because Jill Curzon was an actress I was aware of because she was in Hugh and I, very glamorous actress.
That was a sitcom that starred Hugh Lloyd and Terry Scott, wasn't it, in the early 60s?
Absolutely. Yes.
Who was Jill Curzon then? Because as far as I've been able to work out, she started out as England's clay pigeon shooting champion in 1960 and became a bit of a glamour model and then an actress. So it does seem like a strange curvature to fame.
Yes. There was also an actress called Fiona Curzon. I don't know if they're related or not. She was in Villain, the famous film in the 70s. But no, I remembered her from Hugh and I. So unlike the first film, where I wasn't aware of Jenny Linden, I was aware of Jill Curzon. And I was pleased to see her in the big screen. after having
Because
been on the.
Jenny Linden wasn't available. She'd got prior commitments, so she couldn't be in this film. And the same with Roy Castle. Roy Castle was very much in demand, and he was booked to go on tour. So Doctor Who does get 2 new cohorts in this movie to whisk off on his travels. I personally think that Jill Curzon is very modern. I think it's a much. I don't know how it was written originally and how late in the day they found out that Jenny Linden couldn't return, because it feels like such a different character, JT.
It does, yeah. Just
It
really
really does,
fresh and
actually.
energetic.
Yeah, you're right, Peter, and it's interesting how that's come about. Because of the unavailability of actors, and then another actor coming in and taking over. And I guess it's something that Jill would have to tell us herself how she approached it. But it doesn't harm the dynamic of the setup. And actually, this is a film where they're not, unlike the previous one, they're not all together throughout the whole film. They're actually split up in good old Doctor Who tradition. So I mean, Pete, you mentioned that this film was a little bit darker. What did you mean by that exactly?
I just think, whereas the first one seemed like a more kind of cozy, enjoyable romp, this meant business. There was not the colour palette that the first one had. It's a lot darker and starker. The imagery, I mean, it's outstanding, really sinister. You've got the Daleks going about London, coming out the Thames, all that kind of, and it does look against that kind of apocalyptic backdrop. And I think that really lends itself to
the kind of thing that we now see
film.
in movies such as 28 Days Later. They did something like that, didn't they, as well?
Yeah,
but here we have it in a sort of proto form, and it's no less unnerving, is it? The way that it portrays the Earth, the London that we recognise, and communities that we recognise, and people maybe that are very similar to those that we may live alongside or even have within our own family. I think that's one of the things that works so well about this film. But I want to talk briefly about Bernard Cribbins, because at the time Bernard Cribbins was a familiar face on TV and in film. He was 38 years old at the time. He'd been in such films as Two-Way Stretch and The Wrong Arm of the Law, The Mouse on the Moon. That starred Peter Sellers, didn't it, Ian?
It did,
Yes.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
The other Moon film starred William Hartnell.
That's right. So this is a man who'd been around, and so in the absence of Roy Castle, I think if you're going to get somebody to sort of fill that void, Bernard Cribbins is, I can't imagine getting better, really. Again, a very physical actor, slightly more rough and tumble, I think. And I think he's very convincing as Tom Campbell. There's a character called Tom Campbell in the TV one, of course, but it's the same character in name alone, really.
No,
isn't it? Nothing
Campbell.
about it.
David Campbell.
David Campbell, that's it, yeah.
It is a nice sort of bit of casting there, because, of course, the public would have known Bernard Cribbins because he was huge then. Never mind now, with all our generation growing up with him, basically through Jack and Ori and various things. He had been in the Carry On films, so his comic timing had been proved. And what he brings here to the role of Tom in this is just that little bit of madcap, if you know what I mean. But he knows he's playing a policeman. And yet the comic bits that are brought through are done beautifully, because it's not over the top. It's not slapstick, like what Roy was told to do at the end of the first film.
Nothing against Roy Castle, but I think that Bernard Cribbins is considerably better at conveying the truth of a character. He's very convincing as a policeman, but he can turn his hand to the physical stuff as well. And I really enjoy Bernard Cribbins in this, because Charlotte, you're very familiar with Bernard Cribbins in Doctor Who through playing another character entirely, aren't you? So
yeah, I knew I love him and knew him as Wilf, and I think even just from seeing him in the not modern series, you could sense he just has this innate warmthness about the character, and it's just such a Bernard Cribbins thing. And I think it was interesting to see him in this be young, because I could compare almost in my head, even if I didn't know I was doing it. And I could see that sort of I think he plays fish out of water brilliantly because obviously his character's just been chucked in with these mad people and he's just been chucked into the end of the world out of nowhere. So he sort of goes from being fish out of water to very quickly adapting his character. And Bernard plays that quite well there. You don't think, oh, it doesn't make sense why he's suddenly capable. It's almost like he always had that in him. It was just this adventure that brought that out. And
Charlotte, did you find when watching it, you took to the character, not just of Tom with Bernard playing him, but of the others and Peter's Doctor Who? Did you find that you liked them instantly?
I think it was Peter Cushing you could tell this was a human Doctor, and I knew that going in that in this version the Doctor's not a Time Lord. He's like this sort of mad scientist, was my rough understanding. And you could definitely see that sort of, I don't want to say he comes across as intelligent, but on a human level. And you can get that in the performance. And I think him and Cribbins have some very fun chemistry as like a double act, especially when like they're exploring the warehouse and they're sort of back and two with each other. I do though think I prefer Barbara from the classic series because I really love Barbara, and obviously
she's a great actress.
Yeah,
Jackie.
Louise is sort of this version of another version of Barbara, and I just think the classic's got a bit more sort of forthrightness, which I like, but I still liked Louise. I just prefer Barbara.
Yeah, she's closer, but I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, so Peter Cushing is back as Doctor Who in this film, back after, I suppose you could say, yeah.
Dan,
go on, sorry.
Can I say something? It's interesting because Bernard Cribbins, I knew from his funny songs. Right, said Fred. That's
all hit the top 10. He was the top 10 artist back then.
Yeah, and later on, he was the voice of the Wombles.
That's right.
So, to me, I didn't really see many of the films he did, but he's more identified to me as the voice of the Wombles and the comic songs. But he had his own series, which is available on Network DVD. His own series, Cribbins. But 1971, he had his own TV series as well. So he has had a very, very varied career. And
I think he was in The Railway Children as well, wasn't he?
He was. Classic British film there by Lionel Jeffries, the director, and he plays a beautiful part in that, where generations of kids will just fall in love with him on that one alone. You know, I think that must have been one of the earliest memories I've got of it being introduced to Bernard. And I can't remember if I saw The Railway Children before 2150. But again, you know, like with the original film, I discovered Dalek Invasion Earth 2150 through Saturday morning television, because I think it was on directly the week after Doctor Who and the Daleks on the BBC, on BBC One, in that summer period. And I saw this film before the Hartnell version, just like the week before. And it still gets me, you know, how the impact is on there, you know, and I don't know if you guys got that same impact when you first saw this particular film.
Well, this was the first one I saw. Just like with the Star Wars movies, I saw them out of sequence. I saw this one first, so I had no idea what had happened in the first movie. But obviously, the general DNA of Doctor Who as a formula, if it has one, is there. You know, all you really need, I suppose, is the disappearing and reappearing box, the figure of the Doctor, the recognisable, eccentric, slightly older than middle-aged, slightly unknowable adventurer. He is still very much there. And I wasn't familiar with the story at all. And so for me, this was, I think, probably for the best part of 5 or 6 years. Yeah, maybe longer, no, 7 or 8 years. This was the only version of this story that I knew of. And Peter Cushing's Doctor was still very much, I was aware that this wasn't part of the continuity, but he was still a character that I really warmed to and that I loved. And obviously Peter Cushing had huge success, as I think we've spoken about before on the show. He had huge success in film and in television and stage and radio. And so to find this character and to connect with it, I get the impression that he was fonder and more comfortable in this role in the second film than he had been before, which is perhaps it's always going to happen with an actor. That I suppose that's no great leap, but I think it's very evident on screen here. I think he starts to play with the character a lot more, seems very confident, and less like he's walking in somebody else's shoes. I think he stands up a little straighter, and he's firmer in places, which I mean, I don't know what that says about the script itself, or whether he was being given direction like that, JT. Am I right picking up on that?
Oh, I think so. But I think also they've just come off the back of a very successful first film, and they've been recommissioned to do a second one. Now that does wonder for anybody. And also the fact that he was coming back with the same production team, the same behind the scenes team. I mean, you're right. He actually said, well, this is my particular gig. You know, he's not worried about what's going on television. He's not worried about that at all. He's focusing on that role. And then he's got the new people around him. I'm wondering, does anybody, Pete, do you know, has Cushing actually worked with Bernard Cribbins before at this point? Because as Charlotte indicated there, the chemistry between them is incredible.
That I'm not too sure of. Certainly not in any horror film that I'm
right, so
aware of.
Cribbins can do horror.
Yeah.
They did work together again on an adventure film, but I think it was after this.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing then, isn't it? They both hit the ground running like that, and obviously just got on instantly. Yeah.
Mind you, I think Cushing, with the type of person he was, you know, he could have got on with anybody because he just had that kind of warmth about him. He was very
an actor, wasn't he?
Very down to earth as well. You know, he didn't actually, you know, treat any other actors as lesser. You know, just because he has caliber, then you know he could have quite easily, and I'm quite sure a lot of actors that maybe were in that kind of distinguished role as well, they would have maybe felt that they could get away with belittling other lesser known actors that were kind of maybe just up and coming. But you know, that's maybe, you know, a testament of Cushing's nature.
Can I go back to something that was,
yes, of course,
we talked about earlier? When I was watching Doctor Who at the start in 1963, 64, I always thought of myself as the other companion. I was secretly on board the TARDIS, and you were the extra passenger. Now, it's interesting. Not long after, I think about the 64, The Curse of the Daleks was a stage play. I remember seeing it and advertised, and I thought, oh, it's in London, I'll miss that. So the Daleks had not only been on film, but on the stage as well. Now, when Terence Dicks wrote The Daleks in the Seven Keys to Doomsday, I never saw it, but apparently Wendy Padbury was one of the characters in it, my favourite companion. There were two characters who moved from the audience onto the stage to look after the Doctor who wasn't well.
Yeah, they literally pulled two people out of the audience, didn't they? Obviously, there were two actors that were planted in the audience.
Yes, but a lot of people thought it could have been me. With the Tom Campbell character, he was just an ordinary policeman, suddenly getting this trip of a lifetime, reinforced in us that maybe one day we would meet a TARDIS. Yeah. Maybe one day we would go off and have thrilling adventures. And Bernard Cribbins' character was interesting because he was quite a normal, everyday character. Mm-hmm. And I love the fact that they sorted it out in the end. The end of the film was a good bookend to the beginning of the film.
Yeah. It's a romantic end. It's not possible, but it's a romantic end. You know, we'll put it out. I mean, that picture there that you just you put up there as well. I mean, that just smacks 1960s Britain to me. Because look, you've got the bit of the fog there. It looks like it's been raining, or it is going to rain. You've got these three actors in there. You've got the Daleks in there. It's a wonderful picture. That look at those old cars as well. But that sums up that whole production time for me about Britain back then.
It was a wonderful time, I can assure you. I lived through it.
Yeah. It's interesting, Charlotte, because we better point out as well that, you know, how you're discovering the Dalek movies now is exactly in a similar way to how I and how Peter and how Dan was finding them, because we found them through television as well. So out of all of us, there's only one of us that's actually seen them on the big screen as they were supposed to be made. So it's quite exciting that these things are going to be re-released in the United Kingdom this year now, to be seen again in selected cinemas.
Obviously, as well as Peter Cushing, we talked about it earlier on, Roberta Tovey also appeared again as Susan, the Doctor's young granddaughter. She's 12 years old, making her second appearance as Susan here. And yet again, even though she's so young, she's wonderful in this. And if anything, this girl has to do even more acting, sort of stunts. And with the regrettable illness of Peter Cushing, apparently, yes, he did fall ill during the making of this film, and so portions of it had to be rewritten, and some of the action had to be reallocated. Yeah. I think that Roberta sort of picks up a lot of that, and I'm as invested in her as I am in the Doctor. In fact, all four of them, but particularly that there's something about Roberta Tovey in this part. I think it's a really sophisticated performance. Charlotte, what do you think about this? An 11/12-year-old actress in a movie like this, playing such an integral part of conveying the drama. Does that stand out to you?
I think it was interesting just to have a child Susan for me, because I'm so used to the TV show where she is somebody's granddaughter, but she's grown up. So to have woman, so to have that more innocent sort of version, that sort of like, and it sort of you have that instinct of wanting to protect her as well. I found that watching it, that I was really like, oh yeah, whenever she got in trouble, I was a bit more worried. But yeah, but to go against that, like you said, she has got that sense of adultness almost, like when she's saying, no, we have to go back, we have to go and get the doctor. You don't doubt that, and she does have that strength in her voice. So it's so interesting to see that she can play both ends. I think I've
no doubt as well that she could probably fly TARDIS on her own as well. I get the impression she's been delegated.
Well, she did build it.
Yeah.
That Susan, it was established in the first one that particular Susan helped grandfather to build the thing. So absolutely she can.
Yes, but one of the things that's interesting is maybe a generational thing. When I was a youngster growing up, you didn't much like to see heroes as children. You didn't like children as being heroes. You identified with people were a bit older than that. That's interesting. That they definitely didn't make Susan, the TV Susan, a child actor, and I think Grange Hill was a big influence because it was more natural performances. I would admit that Roberta Tovey is a better actress than a lot of the child actors and actors of the period. But nowadays it's all about being represented. But because I'm so much older than you, I remember not being particularly keen on seeing people of my own age on screen.
I think that's the same with most kids. I think kids feel the same way about a lot of other kids now. I think when you annoying kids, precocious kids, irritating, that's the word that you usually hear.
I scream until I'm sick.
Yeah.
It's like I think she got it spot on. She hit the right note as that character. She wasn't that kind of smart alecky, annoying, brattish child. You know, she really had, she kind of commanded it. She had a presence that was almost a kind of, she was like an authority figure in miniature. You know, she knew what she was talking about, and you kind of trusted her. And I think she's a very, very solid performance. Again.
Well, when you look at her relationship with Tyler in 2150, that's a very mature performance for such a young actor, with an actual established actor. And the partnership there that they've evolved and worked on comes through brilliantly in that film, because you know he's looking after her begrudgingly, and of course he really, really gets very fond of her as their adventure continues, as they're moving up to Bedfordshire. It's a beautiful performance from those two. They carry a lot of the film.
It reminds me, JT, of Game of Thrones, the character of the Hound when he's escorting Arya Stark across an entire season of Game of Thrones. It's a very similar relationship. A very grizzled character. Andrew Keir plays Wyler in this. He played, I think he'd either played Quatermass or was about to play Quatermass.
Yeah, another Hammer name, another big Hammer name, Andrew Keir.
Was he in Hammer as well?
Reliable
actor.
He played Quatermass in the Pit. He played Quatermass.
Ray Brooks is also in this film. Ray Brooks was in a film called The Knack, wasn't he? Which was a kind of kitchen sink drama. Very much a face of the time, wasn't he, Ian? So casting Ray Brooks would have also got people's attention.
Absolutely. But it's interesting because one of the key things in the TV series of Daleks Invasion of Earth was they had to write out Susan. So she had to fall in love with David Campbell. Now, they had to change it, and that's why he became Tom Campbell, and completely different dynamics altogether. The David in the Ray Brooks character.
Well, of course, in 2150, David is with Doctor Who, isn't he? That rings a bell with me, because I remember when I first sat down to watch this that Saturday morning all those years ago, Ian. I had read by that point the Target novelization of the serial, and I knew that Susan, I mean, it was well known, Susan left at the end, and I was quite, how are they going to write this Susan out of this film? So when you get to the end and they don't, that's how they do that, okay, yeah.
Well, talking about the classic Doctor Who TV series, there are other names faces that we see turn up umpteen times in classic Doctor Who. Philip Maddock had several roles in Doctor Who. He's also in the second Dalek movie. So is Eileen Way, who was in the very first Doctor Who story, wasn't she? And she turned up later in Creature from the Pit. So she's in this too. And the rest of the cast is made up of Sheila Stiefel, is in it playing a young crone. Kenneth Watson plays Craddock. Eddie Powell, poor Eddie Powell, they throw him off all sorts of buildings and do all sorts of nasty things to him, don't they? He plays Thompson. Keith Marsh is Conway. And it's there's Godfrey Quigley as well, plays Dortmund, he's sort of the brains of the outfit when it comes to the human resistance against the Daleks. And again, another very hard character that wouldn't be out of place in a science fiction movie like Soylent Green, for example, or the Omega Man. He feels like he's connected to that mode of sci-fi that was kind of being ushered in. Whereas the first movie, Doctor Who and the Daleks, as much as I love it, was there's a sense that some of it is a hangover from the 1950s. I think this film is absolutely the 1960s and kind of prescient to a small degree to JT, like you were saying, slightly ahead of its time.
Oh, definitely slightly ahead of its time from its production value. I mean, as a young person watching this film, you could tell that it was bigger because of the outside location. I mean, I was impressed to find out years later that the scene where the Dalek saucer has arrived in the vicinity of Sloane Square, it's actually a set. That was a set.
I was convinced that was
with
real.
all that rubble and stuff like that. And the bit down there with it's all a set. It's on a soundstage. And it's amazing to think of all this, what talent and what brilliance and what time it took to put all that together, and the quality of it comes across beautifully on the film.
No, I didn't find that out for years either.
Yeah, look at that. I mean, look at that image alone, and that is so haunting.
Yeah,
that backdrop is incredible.
Even though we can see it's a set,
exactly.
And obviously the with each successive re-release of archive movies, the quality of them, the bit rate, the pixels that we get to see, we get to see every little tiny detail of these movies now, don't we? At some films and TV shows, they age better than others. Sometimes you get to see the sellotape holding things together. But with this film, I know there's something about this movie that I think you can sometimes see the joints, but it doesn't really matter. It still has enough reality to hit home that this is our Earth, and yet it also has that dreamlike quality that the first film had. Again, a very precise balance. And I'd say that nowadays, big Hollywood movies can spend 2 or 3 years putting a feature film together to try and achieve a similar feeling, whereas this movie was out in cinemas less than a year
later.
the other one who premiered. It is extraordinary that the momentum behind it seems next to impossible.
You're absolutely right, Dan. And of course, in today's world, they spend millions of dollars, because it usually is $1, on CGI effects. And yet here we have Daleks Invasion of the Year 2150, and there's one point where you can see the string on a Dalek pulling the thing over and the explosion going. And then towards the end, there's an inflatable Dalek just being destroyed. That would have been pennies. But, you know, it shows you the difference about the techniques and how they do things, because they're still quite effective.
Yes. The other point you have to remember is the Dalek Invasion Earth, the original TV series. They had to make these episodes very, very quickly. They didn't have much time on them. And yes, the film had some more time, obviously, to prep it and get it ready. But the TV series was the same. I mean, they couldn't make as many episodes of Doctor Who nowadays as they did back in the 60s. It was just impossible. The other thing I was going to say to you was the Dalek Invasion Earth was set in the future, but it was recognized Earth a wee bit in present day. It's the first time the TARDIS team went to an Earth, apart from Planet Giants, which was set in Earth as well. But apart from Planet Giants, the adventure was set on. Now, remember, John Pertwee used to say, there's nothing more frightening than seeing a Yeti sitting on the loo and tooting back. And of course, in the Pertwee series, they concentrated on the slightly into the future, because making it that way was much cheaper than building alien sets and all that sort of stuff. And that's why they changed it. But this was interesting. Although it was set in the future, it was not, they obviously had to set it in the future for obvious reasons, but it wasn't too far into the future. And it had a reality about it, with Doctor Who and the Daleks, the original film being set on a planet, as you said, Dan, was more sort of dreamlike and not so realistic. And when Russell came back to Doctor Who in 2005, he wanted a much of his series to be set on Earth.
Yeah, the thing with it about this, to take it back to the movie, is that if you're going to make a movie as a sequel to what you've got, and you've got a script there which is available, and you can pay the author for it, and you can tie it into what you've just done, you're going to do it. And the big draw, of course, is it's Daleks Invasion of the Earth. Again, like in the first film, it's the Daleks in colour. You're coming off the back of it. You're able to see them in locations you can relate to. And I think I
suppose, JT, that if you're being really sort of mercenary about it, you could look at the TV version and look at what worked on television there, and what had caught people's imaginations, what had got them talking about the show, continuing to talk about the show, and realizing you could do that and make it bigger, make it better, make it scarier, make it bite that little bit harder. And I think that's what they do again in this movie with various set pieces, particularly, for example, the cliffhanger to episode 1 of the TV version. That's one of several moments and this is the one that gets sort of replayed closest to the moment that we see on television. And obviously with this greater budget and the full cinema screen to play with, they're able to sell us on the scale of it and the imminent danger, and we get to see characters in the foreground. It's all.
And also, what we have to remember as well is that the brilliance of that is that the producers listened to the youngsters who went to see the first one, and there's more exterminations in this film. Because that's what the kids wanted. They didn't kill enough people in the first film, so by God, they packed them in the second.
I have to say to you, I remember watching Junior Points of View. The Friday after the Dalek Invasion Earth film episode 1, World's End, had transmitted, and there were a lot of complaints. There was only one Dalek we saw coming out of the water, and they didn't appreciate, which was a tremendous scene of the Dalek coming out of the water, same as the Dalek in the sand and in the chase, but they didn't appreciate that They wanted more Daleks in the episode. They were complaining about it. I just
I thought that was a brilliant image. I mean, if I'd seen that at the cinema, I would have been petrified, because I would have thought running into the water would have saved me, that they wouldn't have been able to follow me in. So that would have completely destroyed me.
Pete, when it comes to this film being a bit bigger and a bit glossier, how does it correlate to the sideline world, to the horror films and what was going on over there? Were they getting bigger and more glossier at this time as well, or is this a standalone for Doctor Who and the Daleks?
No, well, I think Hammer were starting to really make their mark, and they knew that they had established terrific actors in Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, but they knew they were onto something by making their films more graphic and more daring than Universal ever deemed, possible. And I think the audience expectation level was higher, so they had to sustain that.
And as a horror man, as a horror fan,
natural development. Sorry,
as a horror fan, though, Pete, I suspect that it could probably never get too grisly for you. But some of the exterminations that we just talked about are really quite visceral in this, aren't they? And whilst we haven't got the energy weapons of the TV version, the smoke that releases from the Daleks' guns when they exterminate people, there seems so much of it. It really does completely envelop its target, doesn't it? And we see flailing limbs from underneath the clouds of the smoke. It pushes it further, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. But even that aside, I think in terms, tonally, this is a completely different film. I think this film has it's got a real atmosphere of menace, a real threat. And I think seeing the Daleks, especially in London, it's somewhere you can identify with, a city, an invasion. Oh my God, this is really happening.
I suppose a literal countdown as well, because the Daleks have a plan. They're doing this to our Earth. The stakes are really, really as high as they could be for the human race. And terrifying. We are given a literal countdown that this has to happen by a certain point, and they are burning their way through human resources and human beings to achieve their goal, aren't they, Ian? And that's we talked about the themes of the first one when we last spoke, and there are definite themes to this film as well, which were present in the original script, but David Whittaker in reworking Terry Nation's original script, he's very adept at this, isn't he? At boiling it down.
He was a very talented writer. There's something else I would say. One of my favorite films of all time is Mars Attacks. And I saw that Tim Burton film twice in a matter of a fortnight, I think. And it was the only film that I went to in recent times that I haven't fallen asleep in. Mars Attacks, the film, was based on a set of Topps Trump cards. You got them with the bubble gum. I think it was 1962. They were very controversial at the time, as was
quite graphic, weren't they?
Yes, they were very explicit. You can buy books of them. The Death of a Dog, which appeared in the film, was very graphic, because there was a lot of complaints at that time about the American comic series being too graphic, and there were things asked in Parliament and so on, and there was people who objected to it. So in a sense, the cards that we swapped as youngsters, the Mars Attacks ones, were not quite as were much more graphic than what you saw in Doctor Who. And it's interesting when I catch episodes of The Adventures of Robin Hood with Richard Green. I'm amazed at how many there are baddies there. They get the arrows in their back, the arrows in their front. They get killed on a regular basis. And that's a real family-friendly, great show for kids. And
talking about nasty ways to go, I think they're being converted into a Robo-Man whether you're, particularly if you're wearing a bin liner, like the versions of the characters we get in this movie, Charlotte, it's particularly nightmarish in this, I think, because the way that the eyes are covered too, a lot of the costumes in this, I mean, people talk about the costumes in this being 1960s casuals that are beaten up a little bit, but the production values, and I think the Robomen in particular work really, really well. What do you think?
Well, I think it's just such a brilliant idea that the Daleks don't just kill everybody; they use humans as like slave labor. It's the fact that, and there's a line, I can't remember who says it, that there's a hint that basically the person's still alive, or the brain, they still have a bit of that memory of who they were.
Yeah, low brain activity.
Yeah, there's a brilliant line about it, like, oh, they're still screaming or something. I can't think of the exact line. And it is just that idea of, what would you rather have? Would you rather have a Dalek just kill you and have it be over with, or be converted and be made into this walking, talking slave?
Well, it's interesting, Charlotte, because there's that sequence that Bernard Cribbins is in, when all the old Robomen are taking their snacks, which kind of sort of undermines, I think, what you were talking about in the seriousness of, maybe that was done deliberately to make it less horrific than you thought it would be. Because that sequence, to me, the comedy sequence, stands out as rather different from the rest of the film. I don't know if you agree with me.
I don't think it's jarring, but I think it is. I think you're right. I think it is very different.
Well, it's very of its time, isn't it? And it's obviously there for Cribbins to showcase a different element of him and get the youngsters laughing at it, and I'm sure they did. I mean, there they are, doing these silly little things and eating licorice all sorts. But it does show what a different side to Tom. It shows what Cribbins can do, and it's a little bit of light relief in what could be, as Pete's alluding to, quite a heavy story for young people, for children. I mean, one of the things that got me as a young man is that some of those Robomen are very sexy, because all you get to see is just their lovely jaws, and they've got this big thing here, and some of them must be very good looking under there. And I've noticed some of that, just thinking, hang on a minute, hello.
Shocking, absolutely shocking. But what disturbed me, seriously, I found this, as a child, I found this really disturbing, the fact that you couldn't see their eyes. The eyes, the windows to the soul. I suppose it's that simple, isn't it, Peter? The appeal of zombies is the fact that you look in their eyes and they're glazed over. There's no humanity left, and I suppose it's a more family-friendly version. More family-friendly. That's just down at the cash point yesterday.
I forgot where you live.
It's a more family-friendly version of the same principle, really.
Yeah, I mean, consider the interval between this and the first film. It couldn't be any more different. I mean, it really could not be any more different. There's the threat level, the tension, just the whole everything that's more or less implied as well. It's not really graphic and in your face. It's done very subtly, but nevertheless, it's incredibly effective. It really is. And
I think some of that comes from the fact, though, that we're so used to the Doctor fighting against an enemy, an invasion, and in this story, it's happened. We've lost. The Earth, the Daleks as reigning supreme, and everything's gone the most horrible version. So it's interesting to see, and I felt this in the classic, that the Doctor's having to fight against, I think, higher odds because of that, and especially here because you see the ships, you see the power. I think this movie really does convey.
It's got a sense of scale, hasn't it, Charlotte? The ships seem massive. The landscapes seem so detailed that you can believe, even though it was all filmed at Shepperton Studios again, it does seem like this is the entire world that's at stake.
And it feels like they're finally, because this is a film and they have the money, they're really running with an idea that the show could try its best. And I think the classic serial really did. And I actually found some bits of the classic serial a bit more, I would say, sinister. Because I think... For example, that scene we were talking about with the Dalek coming out the water, I think the classic one's a bit more sinister, because when Ian's on that bit of beach or whatever it is, I can't remember now, and you've just seen the sign that says like don't dump bodies. And you just think, I'm watching
Yeah,
Doctor Who, and there's a sign talking about dumping bodies.
Yeah.
And then a Dalek slowly, and I think that's what it is in the more classic. It's a bit more slower, and it's a bit more sort of that slow plod.
Yeah, sure.
Whereas
It's a little
in
bit-
the movie,
It's a little bit different for the movie, Charlotte, because of course they had to get back through censors, which the BBC didn't have to do. They could get away with that as a drama or whatever. That's how they could produce it. With the movie, you had to get through your classification, and that would have been a big hello from the people back then. No, you can't show anything like that. What the movie manages to do though is it changes that script, doesn't it? I don't know if you got this while watching it. There's a mystery at the beginning. You've got Act 1, which is before the titles, and then the second act is after titles. They arrive in London, and it's that mystery of what's gone on, what's happening. The Doctor and Tom go off to try and investigate stuff, and you've got Louise and Susan that stay separately, and then they get lost, as it were, and it builds up that mystery. So whereas when episode 1, the impact of the Dalek coming up from the Thames is a sheer shock, in a sense, in this one you're expecting it, and you're building up to when is it going to happen. Surely that's possibly what happened back then. It's hard to say.
Because obviously Tom didn't know what a Dalek was. Doctor Who does, doesn't he? And they're his old enemies.
One of the things that interesting, I just throw out when I remember, because I you trigger me to remember things and then I forget. Is would it have been better if the 2 Doctor Who movies had been original stories rather than based on existing scripts?
I think the problem with that would have been time, wouldn't it, Ian? Because they were coming off the back of the success of the first couple of years of the TV show. They were also riding the wave, as we mentioned in our previous episode, of the merchandise and everybody wanting Dalek merchandise, and there was money to be made, and it had to be made quickly. The fact that the first film was received very quickly, they had to go from a bat. They have a script there that's handy. All it needs is a bit of a rewrite to suit the budget they've got, the time limit they've got, the cast they've got, whatever. I don't know if I mean, had they moved forward with any others, they would have all been based on the serial. But that's what they were doing at the time, as we've said before. They were doing things based on television stuff that was around, and I don't think surely it wouldn't have affected any of the audience's enjoyment, because there are subtle differences.
Yes.
Well, because they had, believe it or not, I mean, even though we talk about these as Dalek movies, and I do think that's right in all seriousness, they did consider briefly turning the Keys of Marinus into the second Doctor Who film. Very briefly.
My favorite serial.
Ian, so close and yet so far.
My favorite serial of all. I missed the first 2 episodes when it was originally transmitted. I missed the Velvet Web and the Screaming Jungle, but I saw it later, obviously. Interesting, because in the break, this is a collection of books, totally unofficial, that have been released, and this one is on the Yeti invasion of London, and there's various reasons why the Yeti were particular favorite monsters of mine, and they imagine that there was a number of films made starring Peter Cushing, and I can't say where I got it from because I don't remember, but there's this line of books, and it was about 9 of them, but they're all based on existing scripts, which have been altered in one way or another.
I mean, the sky would have been the limit had this one performed a little bit well, but everything has its time and everything has its place. And Dalek, by the time this 2150 AD was released, Dalek mania was dying off. We know that. That's a fact. And people were moving on, and the show was also moving on television. So, there were hits and misses around this sort of thing, because but this was still it wasn't as popular as the first one, but it was still popular, and it's such a shame, isn't it, really? Because as Pete's saying there, this is a beefier film. This is a bit more of a less cozy film. It's not, it's moved it on a bit. So
the budget to Dalek Invasion Earth 2150 AD was £286,000. So it's not twice the budget, but it's a significant increase on the first one. And Amicus had originally bought the option to make 3 Dalek-related stories from Terry Nation and the BBC, so negotiated with both of them, and they did make moves to make a third one. I think they got it in the back of their heads while they were making this one that the third one was going to be based on the chase, but it wasn't. It was pulled solely because this film unbelievably underperformed at the box office. It seems so strange when I think, generally speaking, how people react to these movies is similar to how you do, Peter. This is probably nearer the mark, and yet it didn't do so well. In fact, it didn't anywhere near make the kind of money that they expected to, that they needed it to justify that third one, which obviously they would have wanted to. Because I think when you make successive films in a series, if you look at the James Bond films, obviously it's a prime example, your ideal scenario is that each successive one is bigger and better than the previous one to justify getting people out of their homes. I mean, perhaps it wasn't quite so much in the mid-60s when there wasn't home video and video games and streaming and all that kind of thing. People need a lot more persuasion to get off the sofa now. But back then, I think it probably was the case too, particularly with the gradual decline of Dalek mania, as you described there, JT. I hadn't thought of that.
Oh, absolutely. I think that was part of it. I mean, look at what was going on when this movie was released. The original youngsters were growing up again. They were becoming a lot more too cool for school. The show was moving on television as well. We all know what was going on towards the latter end of the 60s with the TV show. So there's a lot that contributed to it. Plus, I think movies were moving on as well. And it is a shame. I mean, for those people who are listening to the podcast in here, we're just looking at some photographs on screen of the interior of the Dalek saucer, and you can see there from the sets, it's amazing. You've got all this ramp sets that goes around with the Dalek actors have to go sets. I remember watching this as a young lad and being very frightened for the actors inside the Dalek, because they were getting so close to the end of that set, and there's no safety barrier like there had to be today, or the design would have to, and they're in this casing. And they must have been looking at where the end of the set finished and where this gap was going to be.
There were a lot. This film now, if it was being made now, they would tag it as a health and safety nightmare. Apparently, lots of stuntmen were injured. Things caught fire. Things exploded. Things fell down. It was a bit of a disaster. Maybe that could have been, perhaps that was the momentum of the shoot, the fact that this again was made over like a 6 or 7 week period, very, very intense, with a lot more extra bodies doing a lot more things. And I was watching a documentary about it the other day, and saying about how the van chase with Andrew Keir's character and Susan, Wyler and Susan are in the van. And apparently that van was driving at a proper rate, at a proper lick, as you know, it had knocked over all those Daleks and then shoots off down this country lane. But Andrew Keir, Wyler was meant to be driving, he was given a stuntman. But Roberta Tovey, who was 12 years old, wasn't. She was told, and there was no seatbelt in that van, so she was told to hang on for dear life, whilst the stuntman swings this van around, and then they jump out of it, and somebody blows the bastard up.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that you're absolutely right. I mean, you wouldn't get away with any of that today. But then the filming techniques
all shot in about an hour as well, JT. All shot in about an hour.
You probably all do it now from the comfort of a robotic soundstage where the car's moving around and it's a false car in front of a visual screen, all the latest technology there. You know, you don't even have to go outside anymore to do any of that stuff. You can really project it all. I mean, that's the beauty of these films. I mean, they are very much of their time, and you can actually see the influence of that coming through. I want to say something, though, about the design of this film, because although it's not as glaring as its predecessor, it's still beautifully done. I mean, we talked about the exterior sets built at Shepperton recently, but the Daleks themselves, I think, look gorgeous. They have moved on from Doctor Who and the Daleks, which I love the Dalek look in those. These are slightly more subtle. You're starting to see the TV influence here. You're getting it's the midpoint, isn't it, between the TV and the previous film? Absolutely, and I think it's more Dalek Invasion of Earth 2150 that has impacted on modern day Daleks, if you know what I mean, and the look of them, and I think they're absolutely fantastic. The interior of their TARDIS in this film 2150, again, it's tidier than its immediate predecessor, but it shows how the Doctor Who is moving it on, you know, and those iconic police box doors appear, don't they, in these films? You know, they eventually work them into the series. It's incredible what it's doing here.
There was a lot of resistance to that. But...
Yes.
One thing I'd like to say is this book, Doctor Who Scratchman, Tom Baker and Ian Marter wanted to make a Doctor Who film.
Yes,
for
we
years.
know.
It was
Yeah,
an
yeah,
original
yeah.
story.
Yeah.
It never got made. So
It wouldn't have
we're-
been done by the same team, though, of course, would it? So it's a shame, really. But yeah,
No. And to be fair to them, you know, the two gentlemen, Subotsky and Gordon Fleming. I mean, now when we talk about Gordon Fleming, it always comes with that footnote that he was. Gordon Fleming died in 1991, but his son is Jason Fleming, who I think we've all seen in several movies. He's worked a lot with Guy Ritchie. He was a regular on Primeval. He's been in X-Men films and all that kind of thing. But the two guys, you know, the writer and the director, they did want to make more Doctor Who movies. And Subotsky, in particular, the idea never really left him. He continued trying to make a Doctor Who movie until well into the 80s. I mean, I'm not sure who it would have starred, but he kept going back to the idea and working up scripts. And yeah, you're right. There was the Tom Baker, Ian Marter project too. All these other things were also sort of bubbling along. There's just something that I suppose Doctor Who was always, as a concept, as cozy as it all is, and Saturday tea times and all those things that we talk about, I think it's very evident that it could be upscaled in this way and still maintain its integrity and to be recognisably the same thing. And I feel that as much as I love the first film, that's probably a balance that Daleks Invasion Earth does strike that bit better, that bit clearer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a fair enough example. It is bolder, it's more confident in what it's doing, and it's fantastic that it's going to get the chance to be re-released again, not just as the 4K and the Blu Ray version, but the opportunity to hopefully see it on the big screen as it was originally made. I mean, what a tribute to everybody that was involved with it.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose they would have been, as Peter, as you were saying, there was a big. It was I don't want to say a sausage factory, because I think that the people who made these films, they were immensely talented people working in an industry in a country where they probably weren't getting the financial support that was needed. They would have to look to go elsewhere, but they clearly loved what they did. And so, you know, you got brands like Amicus and Hammer, and in fact, I didn't Hammer. They drifted into making comedy for a while as well, didn't they? Make the On the Buzzes films that we previously talked about. So you can see British films sort of trying to reach for guide rails to take them into the 70s until things would hopefully turn themselves around. But sadly, that didn't happen. And the third Doctor Who film was obviously a casualty of that.
We're always going to be left with the whole thing about, you know, what would have happened, you know, what would have happened if they had gone for that legendary lost third film with this production team, you know, and from what we can say, as you've been saying there, Dan, it was always in the mix there. I'd like to ask Pete, you know, Pete, what would if they had gone for this next film, what would have been the effect of where Hammer House of Horror would have been on the next film? Do you think? How would you have seen as an expert in that field and what they were doing production wise? Do you think they would have altered?
I don't know. I think Cushing would have been satisfied at those two and left it at that.
Oh,
I really don't think he'd have been back for a third.
Really?
Was his career changing? Was his career revolving at this point, do you think, to the point where he could?
Yeah, it was kind of accepting more and more roles. I mean, not just for Hammer, but Tigan had emerged. They were using them quite a lot. And then Amicus, I mean, they were starting to flourish as well. Their portmanteau films were taken off. So I think Cushing would have concentrated on that, and I don't think his availability would have been the same.
Well, what films did he do afterwards, after this one then?
He was still doing Hammer films, but he did She for Hammer.
Yeah.
Not a horror film, certainly.
Roy Castle was in that. No, Bernard Cribbins in that, or was it Roy Castle?
Bernard Cribbins was in that one, yeah. But no horror film with Bernard Cribbins, along with Peter Cushing.
But you could say
that was a Hammer film. Yeah.
You could say, Peter, fantasy films. He didn't make many modern day films or sort of kitchen sink dramas or anything like that. He was always fantastic films, whether it was Star Wars or the Hammer Horrors. I don't remember Peter starring in anything which would be classified as a down-to-earth drama.
Wow.
No, I think he was quite entrenched in, the horror genre by then. And I couldn't see him taking on a third.
No.
Do you think that a lot of his appeal comes from the fact that he could appear within scenarios, I won't even say fantasies, because I don't think it needed to be fantasy, but he could appear in productions that were slightly bizarre and left field and exaggerated, but he was such a considered actor, a contained actor, and he had a star quality, but there was enough of the everyman in him, innately in him, that he could sell really outlandish scenarios, plots, and fantasies because of just something about him personally, and about the way he works with material. Probably made him perfect for the Doctor.
He had that gravitas, certainly, and he could have easily taken on like another one.
What was the one that he did take on?
If his work schedule had permitted.
What was the one, Peter, that he did take on? Which was it after the Dalek films where he played basically Doctor Who in a different? I think was it Journey to Earth or something like that? What one was that?
It was he played. What are you talking about? At the Earth's core later on.
That'll be it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was 19. That was in the 70s.
Ah, there you go.
That was about 76. Where he took on that role, Dr. Abner Perry. That was with Doug McClure, I think.
Yeah, Doug McClure.
And there's a name.
And you look at that film and you just think, my God, it's Doctor Who.
Yeah,
that looks like the third film.
Yeah.
But
so that's what I think. I think possibly any third film, had it gone into production with Peter Cushing as Doctor Who, possibly would have felt and looked like, because by then they would have been in the 70s, wouldn't they? And production technique was changing to that very unique 70s look that you can see running through some of the Bond films, for example, as a British film. It has got that unique 70s feel, and that one, Warlords of Atlantis, as well, in that sort of thing, has that unique 70s feel. So,
definitely in that bracket. You can catch Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD.
Woo!
Along with the first film, being screened regularly by Talking Pictures TV at the moment, and apparently on the Horror Channel, wasn't it, JT? They're showing it on the Horror Channel.
Absolutely, you'll be able to see them on Horror and Horror Plus One, along with Doctor Who and the Daleks. And yeah, just as we mentioned earlier on, the second Dalek film is about to be released on the 18th of July 2022 in this brand new edition, a re-release, only this time in 4K Blu Ray, all singing, all dancing. You can get it in a steelbook, or you can get this enormous box set with posters and pictures and a commemorative coin and all manner of things, and some custom artwork there to add to your shelf, take up some more space, and to complete your collection, albeit from a parallel universe. So I think we should have a little taste of what to expect.
Before you go, isn't there a book being published? I think in September.
There is, but we'll come to that. Yes, there is a book being published by John Walsh. Yes, John Walsh. And yes, on a future edition of Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, we're going to be talking to him about his entire process in writing that book. So I'm really looking forward to speaking to him. It's going to be a whole Dalek summer for us here on Type 40, Ian. And what we're going to do now is take a look and to whet our appetites for this re-release. And yeah, hold tight, everybody. Here it comes.
Yeah.
This is the year 2150.
Look! Daleks are the masters of Earth! Exterminate!
We must find out their weakness.
We'll show them who the masters are.
Nothing can stop us now!
Wow. Wow.
That was another fantastic trailer. Wow.
You've got to hand it to them. Whoever's putting these trailers together, Charlotte, considering that film's nearly 60 years old.
Superb.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's brilliant, and I just think in general, what I love about Doctor Who is it seems that it's never wanting to forget its past. It's always wanting to embrace it and go back to it, and that's just. I know other shows.
Timeless child.
We're not talking
Pointless
about
child.
that. Nice things.
no.
Now. No, but that's. I know other shows have got the sort of history. They don't ignore it, but it's just that, like you were saying, this film didn't do as well as they wanted, but it's never been forgotten, and it's sort of now
Absolutely.
coming back.
True.
And it would be amazing, Charlotte, to see how well it's done since. Because we've all attached ourselves to it. You have my generation coming and discovering it on BBC One television on a Saturday morning. You've had your generation coming in. We've got new ones still coming in. There are going to be youngsters who are going to be discovering it now on all the other channels we've got, plus the Blu Ray editions. We had the videos going for years. I mean, that's why these Dalek films are still around, and why we still talk to them today, and why you can still get all these specials, because they are part of what we do, and it's lovely that we're able to celebrate them again. And congratulations to Canal for bringing out these brand new versions and bringing it all back out again. It's wonderful, exciting.
Lavish.
Well said.
So much attention on them.
It'd be lovely if we had a film based on the Dalek Master Plan, because the two Dalek films that exist as TV versions, but sadly the Dalek Master Plan has only got a couple of episodes surviving. Wouldn't it be great to have
Why did he have to say that? No, I want that film. I want that. They could make a. Surely that's not impossible.
It's not impossible. And Canal, if you're watching on our sister show, Type 40 Live, we've mentioned you before. Go and have a look at them, and please subscribe, because we would love to see a Dalek series. And don't you own the rights to the movie Daleks? Bring it on. We're all ready for it.
I love it. But you know what I love even more? It's the chance in the show where we get to vote where we rate this film, this particular chunk of Doctor Who history. So what I'd like to know, Peter, is how many flying saucers out of 5 do you give Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD?
A very confident 5.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want to tell us why in a nutshell? Why does this one steal the top vote for you there?
It just has all the thunder. It really does. Everything that the first film didn't have, although the first film, had strengths in other areas.
As its
it was a fun, enjoyable romp. But this one was more menacing. It looked better. It felt better. It was bolder. It went further. And it just was tremendous. Great fun.
I'm glad you're happy, my friend. Ian, how many flying saucers out of 5 do you give this film?
6.
I'll take 6 as well then.
So you think it's better than the first one as well? You're confident of that?
Oh yes, I enjoyed it more than the first one. But the first one is good as well. They're both good. But Doctor Who in the 60s was excellent. The 60s was the best era of the show, according to me. But the 60s television in general was better. Look at all the wonderful programs we had in the 60s. Lost in Space, Time Tunnel, Land of the Giants, The Avengers, Champions, Department S, The Saint, The Danger Man. What do you get nowadays? Endless editions.
Repeats. You get repeats from the 60s and 70s. That's where the quality is.
You know what, Ian? Actually, the more I think about it, I do feel that this film does kind of feel like Doctor Who if it would have been made by ITC or somebody like that. I think it feels closer to that model.
Maybe.
The sheen of it, and that slight darkness to it. But yeah, I absolutely agree. JT, how many flying saucers out of 5 do you give this film?
Flying saucers out of 5 for this one. Now, I do love this film. I do love it, but it's not the one I tend to go back to. If I'm going to stick a Dalek film on, I'll go to Doctor Who and the Daleks. For me, this film loses me around about the middle, so I'm going to give this 4.
Why do you think it suffers in the middle in particular?
I'm not too sure. I think I found this when I was younger as well. I just got a little bit bored in the middle with all that whole thing about going through the countryside and then meeting the crones, as they're called, and all this sort of stuff. It just loses me a little bit. Whereas the Doctor Who and the Daleks doesn't. I'm engaged throughout it, and it has a different feel. The two, as we've said here, the two films have a different tone, and the first one engages me more. But I still love this. I still love this film.
Do you think the absence of Peter Cushing from portions of it doesn't help either? Because I definitely feel that.
Yes, it could actually be that. Now that I look at it that sort of way, because I find Peter Cushing's Doctor Who engaging, and I like watching what he's doing with it, and it does travel. But I think, I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 because for the first one, as I say, the first one's the one I'll always go to.
It's something that I've always wondered about, why he's absent for so much of it, why the Doctor seems to vanish, when I do feel that he is a straight arrow through the first film. And as much as I like the rest, that scene with the crones, that even now when I watch that scared the hell out of me when I was a child. The idea that these two women, these two maternal figures really could offer you food and shelter, and then turn out to be out for themselves and so easily bought and in league with the Daleks. It just chills me just thinking about it. And Sheila Steeple and Eileen Way, both those actresses are always good in everything, and they've just got those kind of. Sorry, ladies, I know you're both no longer with us. They're both quite hatchet-faced. I just think it's great. But I know exactly what you mean. Charlotte, how many flying saucers out of 5 do you give this movie?
I think I was impressed when I first saw it with the effects, like the model shots, and like we said, the stages and the feel of just this is bigger. This is if Doctor Who had a bit more money, probably a lot more money, even being honest, behind it. This is what we could maybe get. So that's really good. I really like the dynamic of the Doctor, Louise and Susan, and then Tommy. I think they mesh really well together, and it's a very quick introduction, but they just fit like within 2 minutes. It's incredible how that they do that. And like I said, I really like how the Daleks are so imposing. I think Daleks have to be imposing. You can't weaken their threat, and this movie gets that. But I do agree with JT. There is a bit in the middle, and my possible reason is I think it's because there's a big chunk where they are very separated, the characters. Whereas with the classic show, you would get that, but it felt like very sort of they would come back together at the right time.
There's more shape to it because of the nature of the episodic storytelling and the cliffhangers over an extended period, you think?
Yeah, it just felt like they were a bit more natural lengths of being separated and coming back. Whereas because this is a movie script and it's bigger sort of story and everything, they're a lot more separate, and I just think maybe that's what I don't. That's maybe why I start to lose it a little bit. But
in a film of only 80 minutes, it's quite a lot to have your characters separated for the vast majority of it. I think particularly when it comes to Doctor Who and Susan.
But you have to remember that in the original TV version, poor Bill Hartnell got hurt when they were sort of loading them, and he was absent for one of the episodes. He wasn't there.
But that's, I think, like I said, because you've got 6-parter and you've only got like half an hour possibly of not having Bill in an episode, it didn't feel like it was such a, oh God, he's not been in the story for so long. No. To me, watching classic, but like I said, 4 because this is still really good. But I agree, I think the middle's just a little bit, you need to get through it a tiny bit, and then once you get them all back together, like with the mines and trying to get to the center of the Earth again, it really quickly picks itself back up.
It really does, doesn't it, Charlotte? I agree with that. Yeah, you're sort of back in the story again, aren't you? Yeah.
I think because I'd been brought up watching Scooby-Doo, I was used to them all kind of splitting up.
This film of the two, when I was growing up, was always my favourite. I think it was because it was the first one I saw. I had it on video for a good couple of years before I saw the first film, so I knew it inside out even then. And obviously, ever since, I bought it several times over, to the point where I find it very difficult to score them or to choose. But in recent years, I've come to realize that I actually, for all the things that are great about this, I actually like it less than I used to. And I'd give it 4 flying saucers out of 5 as well. I think that it's what it does deliver, as we said before, it's really efficient, and it's got this sort of pace to it, and it's really, really bold, and it's strident in its ideas and its production, and there's so much to see and so much going on. Yet I do feel, as I've just said to you, JT, I think that the absence of Peter Cushing at key moments and that separation that you talked about, Charlotte, I do think it kind of hurts it. I think it hurts the shape of it as a screenplay, as a story in its own right. I think some of its strengths, the fact that they are on location more, that's great. It's welcome. It's absolutely what should have happened. But I think it's also some of its weaknesses too, because you can see that it's not 20. There's no real effort made to make it look that far into the future. So I think this is the one it's not necessarily a worse film than it was 20, 30 years ago when I first saw it. I just think it's not aging as well as Doctor Who and the Daleks somehow. I think most of it is judged really, really well. I love that it's quite dank and depressing, and that it's not so safe as the first one. I love that too. But yeah, I have to. I'm going to give this 4 flying saucers out of 5 reluctantly, because I can't give maximum scores to absolutely everything. But the good news is, it's always worth a rewatch. It always makes a Sunday afternoon. Absolutely. And I kind of wish it had got another 10 minutes of runtime. I think that could have helped it too. It's 82 minutes long. I think they could have been longer, particularly with that bigger budget. I would probably have put more of it there than maybe in some of the more lavish elements of the production. I don't know. But it does contain lots of iconic moments, some great performances, genuine spectacle. And just like the first one, it is lots and lots of fun and never really lets you go. And there we are. That's the Peter Cushing Doctor Who era brought to a close. You could say, I don't know, before its time. Maybe Cushing.
I don't think we're ever going to be able to close it for the reasons we've mentioned. Each successive generation is discovering them just as much as the TV version, and long may that continue, because they are glorious.
Because for all the practicalities that you've talked about, Peter, you mentioned that the Cushing probably wouldn't have been up for coming back for a third one, and you said, JT, about the fact that Dalek Mania was sort of dying off, and there was an inevitability to that. Still love to have seen a third or fourth one, Ian, and I'd love to see that Dalek Master Plan film.
What you said,
I think it would have been. I think by that time, Peter Cushing had already established himself as, especially that Baron Frankenstein and Van Helsing, and there was further adventures there, and I think that he felt as though he'd done his bit. He's had his wee break from horror, and he delivered that. And
so why would you going to do the radio series?
Sorry, that's another topic, I think, because we don't know much about that off the cuff.
I think we may have to reconvene and talk about the radio series that nearly happened.
If we get some research done, yeah.
Yeah. Who knows? Well, yeah, it's been a blast. It's been a blast of smoke this time, everybody. My thanks again to Ian MacLachlan, to Peter Benassi, to JT, and to Charlotte Shields. We'll catch you again with more Dalek talk very soon.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. Here are the other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. Culture Clash, where we discuss the latest in entertainment and pop culture. Blooded Kings, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theater, we celebrate our favorite movies. And Time Warp, our Fandom Flashback show discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie, TV, and pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Hair Metal Podcast, we cover the rock metal music of the 80s and early 90s. Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, discussing the time-traveling Doctor Who universe. Lethal Mullet, an action film podcast covering the 80s, 90s, and beyond. Also, check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, our Star Wars podcast. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast, with a deep dive into the final frontier. The Fandom Show, our Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube show discussing the hottest topics in fandom. the True Believers MCU podcast discussing the Marvel Cinematic and Television Universe, Union Federation, our Star Trek, and the Orville Show. And we're proud to welcome the BQN Network to the Fandom Podcast Network. Please visit our friends on the BQN Network, a Star Trek Universe podcast that also includes your favorite topics, movies, history, superheroes, and more. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on YouTube. The Fandom Podcast Network is also on all major podcast platforms. The Fandom Podcast Network audio master feed is on Podbean at fpnet.podbean.com. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
Yes, we've teased and tantalized you there, and we can even clothe you too. There's merch to match all of those shows, including Type 40. Just head over to tpublic.com, search for the Fandom Podcast Network, and you'll soon be met with a delightful sight. A store full of all of the team colours for all of the shows, on everything from T-shirts to phone cases and tapestries and everything else you could possibly imagine. Seeing is believing. Treat yourself. Treat your other selves. It all goes to support the Fandom Podcast Network into the bargain too. So everybody wins. I'm back here with Charlotte in the glow of our review there of the second of the two Dalek movies from right the way back in 1966. That's Daleks Invasion Earth, 2150 AD. That classic movie. It's regularly screened on Talking Pictures TV in the UK, and that latest physical media release from Studio Canal, that's still available. It's a brand new restoration on both Blu Ray and 4K, and you can get a standard edition and a steel book and a giant collector's edition with posters and all manner of other things too. So there's one to suit most budgets. I think that's probably what they'd say on the shopping channel, Charlotte.
Anybody basically can have it if they want.
I think this is it. Well, this film and its slightly elder brother, they're nearly 60 years old themselves, aren't they? Here we are on the 60th anniversary year of Doctor Who. It's the same for these movies. They'll be clocking up their own anniversary too. There were rumours right the way through the 70s and the 80s that Doctor Who would come back to the cinema. There was the scripts floating around, and there were bidding rights, touted stars, and lots of producers and scripts. Tom Baker even had a script for a Doctor Who movie. Do you think it's strange that in all this time in between, the decades, let's say 57 years since the last Doctor Who movie, do you think it's strange that it hasn't legitimately, properly happened?
I think it's also stranger considering back when this was made, those sort of more genre, sort of more geeky things weren't as like we get nowadays. We're used to seeing superheroes and these sort of fantastical sci-fi things on big screens now, and Doctor Who would lend itself to that brilliantly. So I do find it more from that perspective a bit weird that in modern day we've never had a Doctor Who movie.
Maybe that's that old thing with Doctor Who. Maybe it is just a question of time.
Yeah, and you never know. Like maybe if the current era gets big enough and it gets successful enough, Bad Wolf with it having ties to Sony, in like if you look back enough, if you understand, maybe Sony might get an interest in it at one point because they've already got the link with Bad Wolf. You never know.
I think it's possible. I keep forgetting about Sony since Disney got involved. And yet Sony are in certainly the equivalent of value, I think, that Disney are financially. It's just they haven't got a streaming platform, have they? Sony they've got a big studio.
No, but Sony's been making some really fan-pleasing movies of late. They've really come back up in people's estimations. So maybe, like I said, I think it'd be nice. It's because I think Doctor Who's got such a big premise and such an imaginative premise. To see that with the money a movie would give it, and more just to realise the more fantastical elements. Like money doesn't make everything right, but it would help to realise certain things that the TV show always struggles with a little bit.
The last person to voice intent to make a Doctor Who movie was the director David Yates. I think it was about 8 years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, if you remember. David Yates had directed several of the Harry Potter movies. And he went really public with this big, broad statement how he was going to make a Doctor Who movie. And the showrunner at the time, Stephen Moffat, he didn't take kindly to it. Do you remember that?
Moffat was a bit weird, wasn't he? Like,
Yeah.
he would like block certain things at a point, wouldn't he?
Yeah. He answered Yates' quote as well. He answered him publicly and said, if anybody makes a Doctor Who movie, it will be the BBC. It will be the current TV Doctor. He was very, very firm on that. How much of that was him speaking from a place, do you think, of knowing that was the case? And how much was a bit of a reflex action, being the company man, being the guy at the time was at literally the head of the production, the showrunner. I suppose he had to say that, but
yeah, he probably was doing a bit of what the BBC wanted him to do. But as somebody who's a fan, I can't help but think
my bosses want me to say, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think there was probably a bit of that. But as a fan, how much debate has these movies caused as to what's canon? Is it,
Quite
you
a
know,
lot.
stuff? And only a fan knows that stuff. So we probably knew as a fan, if there's another Doctor running around, it might because Peter Cushing is always. I know they have tried in recent years to try and like sort out where these sit, but there's still fans who still now don't they debate, is he a real Doctor?
There are. And long may that continue. I personally think that's all part of the fun. And, you know, so did Ian MacLachlan. So, yeah, my thanks to everybody on that review show, to Peter, to JT, and, of course, to Ian. Delightful company. As always, there'll be more from Ian on a later edition of Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast. Don't miss that or anything else that we've got lined up during this 60th anniversary year. You can find it all wherever you found this. Could have been on the dedicated home feed for Type 40 at type40.podbean.com. Maybe we rolled up on the podcatcher of your choice. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Podbay. We're all over the place. Amazon Music, we're everywhere. Give us a break. And you can find us on the Podbean app itself. That's still my favorite. So easy to use, so easy to find. We're also on YouTube, still the world's largest streaming platform here on the Spacebook channel. We're still on the fabulous fandom.
Of all the ones to get wrong, you got that one wrong.
We're still on the Fabulous Fandom Podcast Network's master feed, loaded up with so many treats for your ears. Never mind on the weekly. They're coming at you on the daily there over at the Fandom Podcast Network. So please consider a trip sideways in time to get those quality shows from the FPN. Maybe you'd like to have your say about all of this. You can reach out to us through our social media, Twitter and Instagram at Type40 Doctor Who, or you can email us type40doctorwho@gmail.com. If you're feeling particularly brave, this is where you get the real deep stuff. If you're feeling really brave, you can go and find the Type 40 Facebook group and you can chill out there. Well, chill out, bicker with mainly. Yeah, you can chill out with other Doctor Who fans from across the regeneration cycles and compare your memories about the classic series, about the new series, and speculate about all new Doctor Who going forward. And whilst you're at it, you could even ask them of the two Doctor Who movies from the 60s, which is your favourite. I still struggle to decide, Charlotte. I think I've made some bold claims in both of these review shows about which I think is better. But you know what? All this time on, I'd probably revise the scores of both of them. It seems to change. It seems to change constantly. Yeah, that wraps it up for this one. The 60th anniversary year has so much left to offer, with a lot of it still under wraps, Charlotte. It is getting a little frustrating, isn't it? But I'm hanging in there. How about you?
Oh, I've been grumbling quite a bit recently about this. I understand if they want to keep the actual special under wraps because they don't want spoilers. I understand that. It's frustrating the way they're doing it, but I understand it. The show being 60 should be celebrated. It should be the actual program as its own entity should be being celebrated. And I just feel the BBC have just completely not trying at this point. It
They
feels
need to
like
turn it up. Yeah.
it feels like for the 50th, we had proper like special programming, didn't we? We had an adventure in space and time. We had the actual special. We had what Peter Davidson did. We had lots of these extra little things, and it just feels like we've got nothing at the moment. I'm hoping the BBC announce.
We're living on fumes again, Charlotte. I don't like it. They need to step it up. They definitely need to step it up. And if people want to hear more of us moaning and complaining, where can they do that? Where can they hear more from you?
So you can hear me on Type 40 Live, our live show, and on the podcasts. And I don't really do Twitter and social media, but I am part of the Type 40 Facebook group, if I can get my words out now. So you'll catch me there.
Yeah, and you can find me on Instagram and Twitter as The Spacebook, where I'm wheezing and groaning, ranting and raving about all things geeky, inside and outside of the TARDIS, in movies, comic books, TV, and whatever else takes my fancy. I seem to be stuck permanently in the early 80s at the moment. Everything I see and share or retweet, it's Depeche Mode from 1982. Yeah, I'll share that. I don't know. I'm stuck in a time warp. I think I need shaking up. I need bringing into 2023 myself. So all it really needs is one proper trailer. Maybe we'll get it at Comic Con 2023.
Or just a big announcement, which actually is going to get people excited.
Something. They've got to do something. Bring us the good stuff. And yeah, you keep bringing us the good stuff too in the comment section here. Let us know what you think of all of this. Your thoughts about Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD. Which is your favourite of the two Dalek movies? And yeah, pick up on some of the threads, some of the amazing content and observations there from Ian MacLachlan all the way back there in the early 60s, seeing these when he was a little boy, or any of us on the panel who've been explaining our special connection to this unique take on a TV legend. That wraps it up for another one. Yeah, so thanks again, Charlotte, for stepping in for this one. And our thanks to you for listening. We always have the time, if you have the space, here at Type 40. But that's it for another one. We'll speak to you all again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.